In the waning days of November 1944, a heavy atmosphere descended upon a makeshift war room situated somewhere in the French countryside. This was no grand hall in an ancient chateau, but a raw space with peeling plaster walls, reinforced in sections by canvas stretched over temporary wooden frames. The jaundiced light from incandescent bulbs hanging precariously from the ceiling cast a weak glow, insufficient to drive away the shadows creeping into the corners. The air inside was thick and suffocating, a distinct cocktail of wartime scents, the acrid smell of cigarette smoke from officers who had not slept for days, the burnt aroma of coffee left too long on the stove, and the musty scent of wet wool coats steaming as they dried near a small heater. Outside the window, the first flakes of a brutal winter began to fall, gentle yet carrying a grim omen of deadly stagnation. At the center of this ordered chaos, maps covered every available surface. They lay across rough wooden tables, were pinned firmly to walls, and hung from clipboard stands. These maps were the pulse of the front, cluttered with grease pencil markings. Blue arrows representing Allied corps pointed ambitiously eastward, while red symbols denoted Nazi units being pushed back into ever-shrinking pockets. Dotted lines traced supply routes, where the lifeblood of logistics struggled to feed the great beast of war. Standing prominently over the main map table was General George S. Patton. At 59, he was an embodiment of pure energy, lean, sharp, and restless. His hands were never still, they glided over the paper, touching unit icons as if he were trying to project his will into the men of flesh and blood on the battlefield through touch alone. His eyes burned with an ironclad belief that war was a race of speed, and he was the driver. To Patton, every moment of hesitation was a betrayal of glory. He wanted to crush the Germans, cross the Rhine, and end this nightmare before the Christmas bells chimed. Around him, staff officers were busy in a dance of paperwork and notes. They exchanged nervous glances, all too familiar with the general's volatile temperament. In their eyes, victory was within reach. Berlin seemed only a few bold thrusts away. However, in a shadowed corner of the room, a stark contrast existed at the small desk of Colonel Oscar Koch. If Patton was a roaring fire, Koch was a still lake. He sat there, surrounded by mountains of files, prisoner interrogation transcripts, grainy black and white aerial reconnaissance photos, and intercepted radio logs. Wearing glasses, Koch possessed the intellectual demeanor of a professor rather than a career soldier. He did not roar, nor did he seek attention. His job was to see what everyone else overlooked. While Patton saw a crumbling enemy, Koch saw pieces that did not fit. He saw German divisions vanishing from the radar only to reappear in the shadows. He saw fuel trains moving toward the Ardennes, a sector long considered quiet. A haunting silence began to take shape in Koch's mind as he threaded the reports together. When Koch cleared his throat and stood up, that moment marked the intersection of two worlds, the world of direct action and the world of profound analysis. He did not speak of what people wanted to hear, he was about to throw cold water on the optimism permeating the room. He was about to speak of a truth that would make even the most aggressive general shudder. In the war room, optimism was more than just a psychological state, it had become a religion. For the staff officers of the Third Army, the brilliant summer following the Normandy landings had left an overwhelming resonance. They had witnessed the Germans fleeing in chaos, seen French cities liberated to cheering crowds, and they believed Hitler's war machine was nothing more than a pile of rubble waiting to be swept away. In the minds of most officers, Christmas at home was no longer a distant dream, but a reality being measured in days. The contrast between this spirit and the attitude of Colonel Oscar Koch created an invisible tension, much like the barometric pressure before a massive storm. As Koch presented his concerns, he was not facing a tangible enemy, but rather complacency. Other officers looked at him with eyes half indulgent, half mocking. A logistics colonel chuckled, pointing at the map. "Dear Oscar, where would the Germans get the fuel? Where would they find the tanks? Strategic intelligence says their factories have been leveled. What you're seeing are just fragments trying to cling to one another in their death throes." To the staff, Koch's caution was viewed as a symptom of an overly sensitive intellect, a bookworm's pessimism. They argued based on what they wanted to believe, that the enemy was morally defeated. They believed in the reported numbers of prisoners and occupied ammo dumps. In their world, every blue arrow had to move forward, and any hypothesis of a German counteroffensive was seen as an insult to Patton's great momentum. But Koch did not argue with emotion. He stood there, lean and calm, facing the sarcasm with a terrifying steadfastness. He knew that the greatest danger in intelligence was not a lack of information, but misinterpretation driven by personal desire. While the staff looked at what the Germans no longer had, Koch looked at what they were accumulating. He pointed out the unusual silence of elite panzer units. He questioned why reconnaissance flights saw fresh truck tracks in the snow in the Ardennes, a region that conventional military theory deemed impassable for large-scale winter movements. To Koch, the stillness on the front was not a sign of collapse, but the held breath of a predator before a strike. This confrontation peaked when a senior officer reminded him that Supreme Headquarters, SHAEF, had issued no such warnings. Koch looked directly into his opponent's eyes and replied in a low, heavy voice, "SHAEF sees what they expect to see. I see what the Germans are actually doing. If we confuse our desires with the enemy's capabilities, we will pay for it with the blood of the men out there." Patton stood in the midst of that verbal battle, observing in silence. He saw the brilliance and aggression of the young officers thirsting for glory, and he saw the anxious, duty-bound face of Koch. This was when the instinct of a genius commander within Patton spoke up. He knew that glory could only exist if it was protected by the truth. The relationship between Patton and Koch at this moment became a strange intersection. Patton loved speed, but he cherished Koch's honesty. He knew Koch never tried to please him with rose-tinted reports. In a world of flattery and blind optimism, Koch's caution was like an anchor keeping the ship of the Third Army from being swept away by arrogance. This confrontation was not just about military strategy, it was a battle between blind faith and painful sobriety. While the rest of the staff was immersed in dreams of a triumphal return, Oscar Koch had transformed his corner of the office into a laboratory of truth. He understood that the enemy, when cornered, becomes the most silent. That silence was not emptiness, it was a calculated preparation. Koch began to delve into details that others dismissed as noise or trivia. The first clue came from aerial reconnaissance reports. Koch spent hours under a magnifying glass, scrutinizing every millimeter of grainy black and white film. While analysts at headquarters reported no significant enemy armor presence, Koch discovered unusual, dark streaks along the edges of the Eifel and Ardennes forests. These were not natural shadows cast by trees. When cross-referenced with photos taken a week earlier, he realized these streaks had shifted. It was a masterclass in camouflage. The Germans moved their panzer divisions by night and hid them under dense foliage by day. Koch noted, Army Group B is invisible right before our eyes. The second detail was a shift in radio discipline. Signal Intelligence, SIGINT, reported a sudden drop in German radio traffic. To an ordinary intelligence officer, this was a sign of a disintegrating army. But to Koch, it meant the opposite, absolute radio silence. The Germans were transmitting orders via telephone cables or couriers to evade ultra-decryptions. However, Koch noticed an anomaly. A large number of German radio units were congregating at traffic nodes behind the Ardennes front but remained silent. They were like musicians who had taken their seats but had not yet begun the symphony. The third clue, and perhaps the most convincing for Koch, lay in logistics reports and prisoner interrogations. A young German prisoner, captured during a minor patrol, accidentally mentioned receiving double rations and a pair of brand-new winter boots. Why would an exhausted army waste precious resources on units in a quiet sector? Simultaneously, intelligence sources from the Belgian resistance reported fuel and ammunition trains moving west, against the flow of refugees. Koch plotted these reports on a map. He used a red pencil to connect the logistics nodes, the dark streaks in the forest, and the silent radio units. A terrifying pattern emerged: the Germans were not retreating. They were forming a massive fist, aimed directly at the Allies' weakest gap, the Ardennes. Koch presented these details to Patton. He didn't offer vague assumptions, he presented figures and images. He pointed to the rapidly repaired railway lines and the disappearance of the 6th SS Panzer Army from the Eastern Front. "Sir," Koch said, his voice low but powerful, "they are not preparing to defend. They are preparing to destroy us." The nights in the Ardennes are filled with the clatter of tank treads, even if we cannot hear it over the radio. It was Koch's obsessive meticulousness that began to shake Patton's overconfidence. The general looked at the reconnaissance photos, then into the bloodshot eyes of his intelligence officer. In those faint signs within the shadows, Patton began to see the specter of an impending disaster. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944, the deathly silence Oskar Koch had warned of was shattered by the roar of over 1,600 German cannons. The entire Ardennes shook. Amidst thick fog and blinding snow, 3 German armies surged across the fragile American lines. Inexperienced infantry units were shredded, communication outposts were obliterated. A massive bulge formed on the military map, threatening to sever the Allied forces in two and drive them back to the sea. While Supreme Headquarters, SHAF, in Paris sat in a state of paralysis, struggling to determine if this was a local raid or a general offensive, Patton and Koch at the 3rd Army Headquarters already knew the answer. On December 19, an emergency meeting was convened at Verdun. General Eisenhower looked directly at Patton and asked, "George, when can you start attacking north to relieve Bastogne?" Patton's reply went down in history as a symbol of military audacity: the morning of December 22, with 3 divisions. The room went silent. Other generals looked at Patton as if he were a madman. To achieve this, Patton had to disengage 3 divisions currently locked in heavy combat on the Eastern Front, pivot them 90 degrees, and march them over 100 miles across frozen roads in a blizzard, all in less than 3 days. To any conventional military mind, this was a logistical suicide mission. But Patton had a secret weapon: the contingency plans Koch had quietly prepared weeks in advance. The movement began in a surreal landscape. Imagine 133,000 motor vehicles shifting direction simultaneously. Soldiers in foxholes, hoping for a warm Christmas dinner, suddenly received the order, "Pack up. We're heading north." It was a nightmare of frost and steel. Truck drivers drove for 24 hours straight, their bloodshot eyes peering through frozen windshields. Tanks crawled along narrow mountain passes, their iron treads screaming as they slid on the ice. The 3rd Army's logistics performed a miracle. They rerouted thousands of tons of fuel and ammunition while keeping the columns moving. Koch and the staff worked without rest, coordinating every traffic node to ensure that the spine of the army did not jam in the snow. By December 21, the blizzard worsened, grounding all air support. Patton, with his characteristic eccentric faith, ordered the army chaplain to write a prayer for fair weather. But on the ground, he didn't wait for miracles. He drove his men with iron will: attack. Always attack. At exactly 6 a.m. on December 22, as promised, the Third Army's artillery began pounding the German southern flank. The great pivot was complete. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne besieged at Bastogne, hearing Patton's guns echoing from the distance, knew they were no longer alone. On December 26, Patton's armored units broke through the encirclement and entered Bastogne. The sight of mud-caked tanks smashing through the German lines was the ultimate testament to the union of Koch's foresight and Patton's courage. Without the quiet preparation of the bookworm intelligence officer, Patton's decisiveness would have been a suicidal gesture. Conversely, without Patton's iron will, Koch's reports would have been mere scraps of paper in a scorched office. This was not just a military victory, it was a victory of trust. A massive army had turned on a dime to save a war, all originating from a single moment of listening in a smoke-filled war room. As the gunfire of the Battle of the Bulge faded into history, the true legacy of Patton and Koch lay not in medals, but in an enduring lesson about the interaction between power and knowledge. The relief of Bastogne is often celebrated as a military miracle, but at its core, it is a masterclass in modern management. How do you make the right decision when all prevailing information stands against you? In today's world, we often idolize the Pattons, decisive, charismatic, and high-energy leaders. However, the collapse of business empires or the fracturing of organizations often stems from a common ailment, organizational deafness. When a leader becomes too enamored with their own aura, they inadvertently build a wall between themselves and the Oscar Koches of their team, those who hold no power but possess the truth. The first lesson from this story is the value of dissent. In Patton's war room, Koch was the only one brave enough to throw cold water on the blind optimism of an entire staff. A healthy organization is not one where everyone nods in unison, but one where the smallest voice, backed by honest data, is given the floor. In modern management, if you do not have an Oscar Koch to challenge your assumptions, you are drifting toward the abyss of complacency. The second lesson is the capacity to listen to uncomfortable truths. Patton loved speed, yet he had the character to stop and listen to a report stating that his plan could lead to disaster. Many managers today only hear what they want to hear, turning subordinates into mirrors that merely reflect their own expectations. Patton teaches us that listening is not the same as agreeing, it is about attaining a multidimensional vision before pressing the button of action. Finally, this story connects to life through the concept of strategic trust. The survival of thousands of soldiers in 1944 rested on a thin thread, a general's trust in his intelligence officer. Whether in family or career, trust is not about believing the other person is always right, it is about believing in their integrity when they say, "Wait, something is wrong." Today, as algorithms and big data increasingly replace human intuition, the role of the Koches, those capable of seeing patterns and true meaning behind the numbers, is more vital than ever. But even more crucial is the presence of a Patton, someone with the moral courage to pivot the army of their life based on a quiet but authentic voice. Bastogne was saved not just by tanks, but by the fact that the loudest man in the room chose to be silent and listen. That is the most valuable lesson for anyone who wishes to lead, whether leading a corps, a company, or their own life. The end of the war brought remarkably different fates to the legendary duo of the Third Army, highlighting the profound contrast between their natures. George S. Patton, the man of glory and grand battles, did not fall on the battlefield as he had always envisioned. Just months after the guns fell silent, Old Blood and Guts passed away following a freak car accident in Germany in December 1945. He was buried among his soldiers in Luxembourg, forever resting in the posture of a legendary warrior. His name remains illuminated in headlines, Hollywood films, and history books as the immortal symbol of aggressive spirit and tactical genius. In stark contrast, Oscar Koch chose an exit as quiet as the intelligence work he mastered. He continued to serve the military for a time, co-authored books on intelligence doctrine, and retired with profound humility. He lived a long, peaceful life, observing the changing world from a quiet corner in Florida. Koch has no towering monuments, and his name rarely graces the front pages, but his true legacy lives on in the breath of every veteran who made it home from the freezing foxholes of Bastogne. This contrast serves as a powerful reminder: one man was born to tear down walls, the other was born to see the cracks. Neither could have fulfilled their mission without the other. The story of Patton and Koch is more than just history, it is a mirror reflecting our lives today. A question for you: in your career or personal life, have you ever played the role of Oscar Koch, seeing a truth that the crowd refused to acknowledge? Or are you currently a Patton, charging forward so fast that you might be missing the vital warnings around you? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We would love to hear about your experiences with trust, intuition, and the courage to listen. If this story resonated with you, like this post to honor the spirit of honesty and moral courage. Subscribe/follow so you never miss these deep dives into strategy and moving historical narratives. Share this with a friend or colleague, perhaps they need this exact message to stop, listen, and pivot today. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Next steps I can help you with. Would you like me to compile all the chapters into one final, polished article? Or would you like to explore another, dynamic duo of history who changed the world through a similar partnership?